The Daily Code Snippet. This past week, we discussed HTML forms. Forms are needed to collect information from your users. The form element is used to create that form, while the input elements are used to collect data. The type attribute specifies the different types of input fields. The label element indicates what data is needed. Here is an example of a simple form to collect an email. Here are a few examples of input type attributes. Input type button displays a button that can be clicked. Input type number defines an input field for a numeric entry. Input type password displays a password field. Input type reset resets all 4 values to defaults. Input type search displays an input field for a search. Input type submit displays a button to submit a form. Input type tell displays an input field for a numeric entry that is a telephone number. Input type URL displays an input field for a URL. When we looked in detail at the most commonly used form inputs, we started with the type attribute, which allows a single line input of text. A typical use is to collect the user's name. You will notice not only the use of the form and input elements, but also the inclusion of a label element. The label element attaches information so that the user knows what data is sought from them. The label element is also added for accessibility. A screen reader will read out the label when the user focuses on the input element. In addition, users who have difficulty clicking in a small region will be assisted by the label element because it can toggle checkboxes and radio buttons when the text is clicked. The for attribute in the label element is used to bind the label to the ID attribute of the input element. So in this case, the first label with the for attribute of first name will attach that label to the first input, which has an ID attribute of first name. This way, the user knows that the first input field is for the user to enter their first name. The name attribute for the input element is also used for identification purposes. In this case, it is a way for that input to be identified for JavaScript actions and for the form to pass its data to a collection method by which the data is gathered. Each input field must have a name attribute for the data to be sent. This is the code for a checkbox input. Checkboxes are designed to allow the user to select multiple options. In order for the data to be collected correctly, each option must have a unique name and value. In contrast, radio buttons are designed to allow the user to select only one option. As a user selects an option, the radio box on another option becomes unselected. In order to present the form with one of the options selected initially as the default, you add checked to the input opening tag. So in this case, prefer not to say is initially checked. Here's the code for a color picker. Depending on browser support, the color picker menu will appear automatically. This is the code for a range slider. Although the default is 0 to 100, by using min and max attributes, you can adjust this. In order to set the interval, you can specify the step attribute. If you set the step attribute to any, you accept any value along the slider. To add hash marks, we add the list attribute to the input element and a data list element with the value mirroring the value of the list attribute. Each hash mark is set by an option element where you set the value attribute to what the hash mark should equal. To add labels, we use the label attribute. However, browser support for both hash marks and labels is inconsistent, so you still may need to add CSS or perhaps JavaScript to fully style your range slider. The last item we went over was the action attribute for the form element, which sends the data you are collecting to a server for processing. Without this step, data you are collecting is not being saved anywhere. Here you see the action is sending the data to a page with the file type of .php. PHP, as another language, is beyond the scope of these videos. The method attribute can have a value of get or post. Get will append form data into the URL as name-value pairs. Because the URL is visible, it is never for secure data. Post will append the form data inside the body of the HTTP request and not in the URL. Since we won't be able to show how PHP works to collect form data, we instead showed a demonstration of using a common CRM software, Mailchimp, to embed a form. The CRM handles the database management for you. By reviewing the embed code, we were able to recognize some of the things we have been going over with regards to forms. The embed code has a form element with an action and method attribute. The value of the action attribute is a URL that sends the data to our free account in Mailchimp. This is part of the code you will recognize from our previous discussion of forms. We see both label and input elements. The form is requesting an email address and the user's first and last name. You see two type attributes used, text and email. You can see how the for attribute of each label is related to the ID attribute of each input. The name attributes for each input is unique so that you can collect these three unique data points. Finally, at the end of the form, you will see the input that submits the form. So as long as you have the correct code as the value of our action attribute to send the data to the CRM services URL for processing, your form will function. Presented by Designers Learn Code.